The death of this young fashion designer in the Hamptons, her body found aboard a boat, is still a mystery. But we have new photos and details. Martha Nolan-O'Slattery was a rising star in the New York fashion scene. She lived a high-flying lifestyle of luxury. But make no mistake, she worked for it. She was an entrepreneur.
Female unconscious, now breathing at the Montauk Yacht Club. 32 Star Island Road.
One night last week, around midnight, she was found dead aboard this boat docked at a ritzy yacht club in Montauk, New York. We have new information on the boat that Martha was found dead on. You can see pictures of it right here, as well as important images of what was found in the boat, potential key evidence in this case. We're learning more as well about who may have been with Martha the night that she died. And that is just one part to this story that is making the plot even thicker. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Police in Long Island, New York are still trying to figure out how a woman, seemingly healthy in her 30s, dropped dead last week. Her name was Martha Nolan. Here's a picture of Martha. She was just 33 years old. Her full name, Martha Nolan-O'Slattery. She moved to the US in the last couple of years from Ireland, where many of her family members still are today and are still hoping to get answers about her death. These are new pictures of the boat that Martha was found dead on. Its name is Ripple. It has a Grateful Dead logo on the back. It's a 50-foot boat, seems to have a cabin in the front end, but also a good amount of space for people to hang out on the back of the boat. A lot of tables, a lot of chairs, and that open air allowed members of the media to go in and take pictures of what was still aboard the boat. And I will get to those new pictures in just a moment. Initial tests on Martha's body the night of her death came back inconclusive. Her body was found at this boat. It was docked at the Montauk Yacht Club. Now, we do know, according to police, that her autopsy showed no signs of violence. There was no signs of trauma or defensive wounds, showing that there wasn't, it appears to be, any kind of struggle. So now we're waiting for the results of a toxicology test. The last time I spoke to investigators, they said they didn't have a timeline of how long it could take to get those final autopsy results. The tests that are being done now will be able to determine what was in Martha's system the night that she died. The Irish Independent is reporting that Martha's family was told it could take as long as 3 months to get those tests back. Now here's a picture that the Associated Press shot of what appears to be a white powdery substance that was on a seat at the back of the boat as well as on a table. Now the boat Ripple is no longer docked at the Montauk Yacht Club. It has since been sailed away to another location, and we don't know what this substance is, and police have not said whether they believe drugs could be involved in Martha's death. And her family's lawyer pushed back this week on any speculation about her cause of death or drug use. Now there have been a lot of questions about what happened around midnight on August 5th. We have witness reports that a man who was naked, that's according to the Daily Mail, was running from the boat, screaming for help and screaming that his girlfriend was dead. And we're learning more information about who that man may reportedly be. I'll get to that in just a moment. And it's not the profile of a person that we were expecting, to say the least. Now, we know that Martha Nolan seemed to spend a lot of time in Montauk in the summer, as many people from New York City do. She lived in Manhattan. Her social media showed that she did live this luxury lifestyle. There are videos of her taking helicopter rides with an unidentified man. And there are also videos of her taking flights on private jets with friends to do both business and pleasure. Martha was not someone who it appears was just tagging along in this luxury lifestyle, but she was someone who had the means to live this life. She was a businesswoman.
Hi guys, this is Martha from East by East. I am the founder, the creative director.
Martha listed herself as the founder of a swimwear brand that was called East by East. She modeled the product herself. In this Facebook post, she captioned she was in her East by East era. She hosted pop-up events in Montauk for East by East. This is a video of one of her pop-ups at a resort in Montauk back on July 1st. This was one of her final posts on social media. And there's a lot of speculation at this point because we don't have these final autopsy results about Martha's death. So here is what police are saying, and here is what we know as far as the witness reports go. Police say it was around midnight on Tuesday last week that Suffolk County Police got a 911 call from a man who was reporting a woman was unconscious on a boat that was docked at the Montauk Yacht Club.
Female unconscious, not breathing at the Montauk Yacht Club.
Tell me when you
32 Star Island Road.
Police say when they arrived at the Montauk Yacht Club, they found who they call Good Samaritans doing CPR on Martha. Police say she was pronounced dead aboard that boat, Ripple. A preliminary investigation and exam were inconclusive when it came to her cause of death. And even though Martha's autopsy didn't show any signs of violence or trauma, police have yet to rule out foul play, and homicide detectives were called to the yacht club where they set up a command post. Again, foul play hasn't been ruled out. A lawyer for Martha's family spoke this week at a news conference, and he said any report speculating how she might have died is not accurate at this time, and a lot of this investigation is hinging on that toxicology test when it's complete. He also said that people were still being interviewed by authorities as part of this investigation. Now, here's what we know when it comes to these witness reports that have been circulating in multiple media outlets. And they're really helping paint a picture of what it seemed to be like to be at this yacht club when all of this was playing out on the docks of the Montauk Yacht Club around midnight last week on Tuesday. Some members of this yacht club say that they heard yelling late Monday night, and the Daily Mail said that witnesses saw this naked man running off of the boat looking for help, screaming, quote, "That's my girlfriend." Now, we see pictures of Nolan with the man in her social media, like this one you see here of her riding in a convertible. Irish media site Extra reports that Nolan was in a serious relationship, and she was actually planning to marry her boyfriend, who had even traveled with her to Ireland to meet her family recently. Nolan was also reportedly divorced. But this outlet is reporting that the man, the naked man, that has been reported through these witness media reports was a man who is in his 60s and was not her boyfriend. We know that Martha's boyfriend, according to these media reports, was away on a work trip the night that she died. But Martha had spoken to him the night that she died. In fact, it was reportedly just before that 911 call was made. She called her boyfriend and told him that she was leaving the yacht club and she had called an Uber and she was getting ready to go home. The Daily Mail has reported that the 60-year-old man who was with Martha the night that she died, the key witness in this case, was the owner of the boat Ripple that Martha was on. He also owned the boat that was docked next to Ripple, which appears to be a fishing boat. You see it here with red seats. He's a wealthy person who made it big, it appears, in the insurance industry, and he owns homes not just in Long Island, but also near Palm Beach, Florida. He also reportedly invested $200,000 in Martha's swimwear company, East by East, according to the Daily Mail. Now, at the time of this recording, he has not been charged, and frankly, no one has been charged in this case, so we are not going to name him, but he is a key figure in this story. It's unclear why Nolan was aboard the yacht the night of her death. Her friends told Irish media outlet Extra that they're also unsure why she was aboard the boat and why she was with that man who is 60 years old, who again is the main witness in this case. Just another twist in this story with so many questions that have yet to be answered. Now, while there are so many questions here in the United States, over in Ireland, Martha's family is preparing to lay her to rest. This is Martha's death notice that was just posted on an Irish website that reads that Martha was a beloved daughter, sister, granddaughter, niece, and partner. It goes on to say, quote, "She will be sadly missed by her loving mother and her mother's partner, Patrick, sister, aunts, uncles, partner, her father, Seamus, and her siblings, her grandfather, Jimmy Slattery, extended family, relatives, and her large circle of friends in Ireland and the United States. May Martha's gentle soul rest in peace." Join us now to talk more about where this case could go next is Mary Jumbelik, a forensic pathologist. Always great to have you on Law and Crime, especially when we're talking about, these very important tests that happen when we're trying to figure out what happened to someone like we are in this case involving Martha Nolan. 3 months for a toxicology test. I mean, I just think of this family and the waiting that they're going through every single day. Why does it take that long to get that type of test to come back?
Well, it's gotten more and more difficult with toxicology testing because there are so many more drugs that are out there. And then in addition to that, so many more people have drugs in their system. And so that the laboratories are overwhelmed, with samples and trying to, find out. The other thing is, it's not a simple matter of just, is one drug present or not? They have to quantify it. They have to know what the level is and see if it's in more than one body fluid, make sure it's not an artifact, make sure it's a real result. And so that takes time.
I know the autopsy was done, you have the initial tests that were done at the scene. Often for us who are on the outside, we just get the toxicology results and then we report that in our stories. What exactly goes into a toxicology test and how that's done?
Well, it's always so tragic when someone young like this is found unresponsive and then CPR is attempted and they're dead at the scene and the family's left wondering what happened. Of course, the autopsy and the examination at the scene are very critical to see if there was violence or anything disturbed or any wounds or injuries to her body. When we're left with testing the blood and the urine and the bile and the liver for drugs and chemicals, first you have to collect all of that material and then you have to send it to the laboratory. Everything is by chain of evidence and chain of custody, and so you have to be careful with it because that's going to be important if anything comes of it. And then the very first screening has to happen where you're just looking at broad classes of drugs. Are there any opioids present? Are there any alcohols present? And then if those are positive, you have to go into more detailed testing to see which specific drug is present and what level it's present at. And to make sure that while you're testing it, that you're getting good results from all your instrumentation. So it's really quite a complicated process.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are pictures that have been put out. And I think with these types of stories, and I think of the family and how difficult it must be because you're waiting to learn what happened to their loved one. And there really just has been not a lot of answers to this point because you've had inconclusive results on the tests that have been done thus far. And then, of course, the speculation comes in and you have these images that have been put out of a white powder that was on, seems to be like a seat on the back of the boat, but then also on a table as well. And then that certainly, you will have people that will look at that, and we're not speculating that that's what it is, but people will look at that and think, okay, there was no violence in her death, but then here clearly we have some sort of substance. And I don't want to go down the path of, it definitely was that, but at the same time, what could it be? Like, just as someone who would do a toxicology test, how does that factor into how we look at what potentially happened to Martha Nolan?
Well, certainly from the police investigation perspective, they're going to want to evaluate that to know if there was any illegal substance on board. From the medical examiner's perspective, they want to know what the police find in regards to that, but they're more concerned about what is in the body of the deceased, what her body is going to show. And, that can be anything from opioids to heroin to cocaine, anything like that. So that's what they'll be looking for in the blood. And I know the family is concerned because they said, to their knowledge, that she didn't, use drugs. But even a novice user or someone who's very new to using a drug can die the first time if it's, say, contaminated with fentanyl. Fentanyl is extremely dangerous. There are tests that users can do to check their drug and see if it has any fentanyl in it. Fentanyl test strips. They're given out for free in New York. You can order it to your home. Narcan, nasal spray, can be bought in pharmacies, and that would counteract any opioids or fentanyl if someone has an overdose from that. But short of that, if you don't know and you take something and it has fentanyl in it, it's a high chance of having a fatal reaction.
I remember when police said when they arrived that there were good Samaritans that were doing CPR on Martha. I've reported on drug epidemic issues in my career, and Narcan and the effectiveness that can have in someone who's having an overdose. Without Narcan, if someone's having an overdose, is CPR something that can be effective? Is there anything you can do to save someone in that type of situation? If she was, and I'm not saying she did, but clearly there's this substance, and if she had taken it in and it led to an overdose, what can be done to try and save someone if you don't have Narcan?
Well, you do CPR, but you have to do effective respirations, and that's just really hard mouth to mouth if you don't have, some support from an ambulance where you can ventilate someone. But you can keep trying that, and sometimes you can breathe enough for them that they're getting some oxygen, into into their system, but they really need to be, on a ventilator then, for that to be effective.
Is there anything when it comes to, because I mean, sadly, there are so many overdoses that happen every single day in this country. And for the initial test at the scene to come back inconclusive, and then you have the initial autopsy that showed there was no, trauma, defensive wounds, violence, or anything like that. And then now we're waiting potentially 3 months for a toxicology test. Is that typically what it takes to figure out that someone officially died of an overdose?
Sometimes it's more obvious than that because maybe a needle will still be present in their arm. So, without that, so to speak, then it does become more difficult. So if there is a lot of drug paraphernalia at a scene, you can see someone was using, with, like I said, a needle, a tourniquet, something along those lines. But if you don't have any of that, then you do have to wait to get the toxicology results back from the body itself.
I know homicide detectives are involved in the investigation, which doesn't mean that this was actually a homicide, but foul play hasn't been ruled out. And if it comes back that there was something in her system that led to her death, how does that play into determining whether or not this was an accident or whether this was something more than that?
Well, again, since we don't know if there's a drug involved, an illegal drug or a poisonous substance, we don't know. We won't know, I guess, until we get the toxicology. But if it is an unsuspected, non-recreational, toxin or some medication that isn't usually abused, then that would be very suspicious. And so you want to know what the decedent was doing prior to death, who she was hanging out with, who she had contact with, all of that. But that's just part and parcel of the investigation to begin with, of, what was the decedent doing beforehand. That's part of good detective work, and so it's good that they're doing that.
What does, and I think this is more a question for everyone, just when it comes to how prevalent fentanyl has become, in this country. And I mean, there's so many stories about it that we would never even be able to report on because it just sadly happens so often. What does it do to the body that makes it have such a strong reaction like we see in some cases?
Yeah, it is much, much more potent than, heroin and morphine. It is dangerous because of its potency. Just a tiny little bit of it can kill you by suppressing your respiratory system. It basically suffocates your cells, and you can't utilize the oxygen, for your body, and that affects your brain. As soon as you don't have enough oxygen, then your brain is affected. So it lowers your respirations, and that is why Narcan reverses that, but it's very temporary. So someone can stop breathing from the fentanyl overdose. You give the Narcan, they can start breathing again, but you have to give it very frequently until you can get them to the hospital where they could get respiratory support.
What would you see in a toxicology test if that was in someone's system?
The fentanyl would show up as a drug.
Just the drug itself, there'd still be remnants of it?
Yes. And, there are subtle findings at the autopsy. For example, when someone dies of an overdose, often we see a lot of pulmonary edema. That means the lungs are kind of full of fluid because they're not working properly. And so that might be something that would suggest it at the autopsy.
Again, there's so many things we don't know in this story. But I mean, how common is it that a toxicology test can't determine how someone passed away?
Did you say can't?
Can't. Like if just knowing to this point that it has been inconclusive thus far, and there's a lot of attention on this case, that how likely is it, just based on how toxicology tests work, that will come back with a key piece of information that could help piece together the puzzle of what happened?
I mean, I think just given the circumstances, it sounds like the toxicology test will be really important in this case and will give the answers. But it's important to note that adults do die suddenly sometimes without an explanation. I know we can think of that with infants. We're aware of that in infants under the year of one. In this case, sometimes a young adult dies suddenly and we don't find an answer. But that's very rare, but it remains a possibility.
And I know you're talking about just, I just think of the medical examiner's office and just how many times a day you may be doing, work on someone who had overdosed. This is a high profile case, sadly, compared to the names that we'll never know. Do cases ever get pushed to the front of the line if it's something involving someone who might be more known, or she wasn't a celebrity, but there's a lot of public interest in a case? Does that impact when a toxicology test is done?
I think certain cases might rise up faster through the system only because if the community has a great interest in it, then there's a lot of pressure on the office to get it finished, and if only to answer the question so they can move on and do more work. Yes, that might happen.
And then just lastly, how long does you get the body, you're scheduled to do a toxicology test today. How long does it take to get the results?
Well, if everything is negative and it happens to be a light day, perhaps you could get the results in 6 to 8 weeks. But most of the time it's going to take longer than that because inevitably people have some drugs in their system, even if they're at small levels and not very important, like a little bit of Tylenol, or an aspirin. That still requires the testing and documentation. So more and more people have more and more drugs, even drugs that they're supposed to be taking in their system, and that requires more extensive testing.
Yeah, well, it's very sad case either way. This was a woman who had such a life ahead of her, but definitely a mystery that we're continuing to follow. Mary Jumbelik, forensic pathologist. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime, helping us understand the science behind so much of the information we eventually get, but understanding how we get to that point. We appreciate your time.
Sure, thank you.
We are going to continue to keep a close eye on this story. We're continuing to stay in touch with law enforcement. We'll bring you information as it comes into us. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.